I'm Cynthia Meyer.
And I'm Veronica Woods.
And welcome to the Rental Property Café. We want to invite you to join us for a conversation about all the things that you really need to know to start and grow your real estate portfolio. Launching this podcast, I really wanted to help other first-generation real estate investors like me who have built a real estate business on the side while doing something else. I really wanted to pass that on and share some things I've learned in this journey. And I was so excited that Veronica, who comes from a different perspective, wanted to join me. Veronica, what brought you to the table here?
Cynthia, as you know, I do come from a real estate investing family as a real estate advisor with my dad's company. So I've been around it all my life, but it really is an interesting opportunity to speak one-on-one or partner with a financial advisor, because I find that a lot of my clients who are working professionals don't have the support to look holistically at their investment opportunities. It's always stocks and bonds on one hand and stay away from that real estate. And I think, we can really provide a forum for people to get more information about, like I said, more holistically about their investments to prepare for retirement.
I think that's a great point, Veronica. And many people, when they're thinking about buying properties directly, they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And owning direct properties is an investment that requires ongoing work. So it's an investment, but it's also got components of a business, even if you don't do it full time. Tell me a little bit about what's your story, or what should we know about you?
Well, as I mentioned, I come from a real estate family. My first job ever was really in my dad's real estate office at 15, and I helped him process rental property checks and expenses. Of course, I thought it was totally boring. So I went off to college, majored in economics, then went off to Wall Street, went back to school, got my MBA in finance from Wharton, and then really was set off to do more of a corporate trail, but always invest in real estate on the side, because that's just something I was, grew passionate about from an early age.
So you always intended to incorporate real estate into your financial life.
Exactly. So I can relate to probably some of our listeners who have a full-time job, have an interest in real estate, want to do it right, and kind of with your full like corporate hat on, but just not having the right team around you.
That's interesting. Well, so my story, as I said, I'm first generation real estate investor. My parents did not own investment real estate, and my husband's parents did not own investment real estate. And we came into this during the last recession. We were living in Bermuda at the time, and we were renting a house. We had sold our house in California before we moved there, and we were about to come back to the United States. And we thought, this is a really great time to buy real estate. We'd been very diligent savers, and we had prepared for a while trying to really build a strong financial foundation before we got started. And so we took our time, and we used some mighty math powers to make some decisions about building a rental property portfolio. But over time, as a financial planner, I realized that a lot of people have questions that they want to ask their financial planner, and their financial planner might not necessarily know how to answer them because they're not a real estate investor themselves.
I think that makes a big difference in your team. And I know we're going to explore a lot of topics about team and invite people who should be members of your team on future episodes.
Definitely.
But I think that the professionals that you have around you, if they also invest in real estate, it definitely makes a difference.
That makes a lot of sense, Veronica. So working with somebody like you, who is both a property manager and an investor and a realtor, can be super helpful. And also building a team, which we're going to talk about with different folks in the podcast, about all the professionals that you need to help you do different parts of your real estate business, anywhere from buying to maintaining to renovating the property. So tell me a little bit about your first real estate investment.
So my first real estate investment, I don't think I was as thoughtful in the planning as you were, but I was kind of anxious to get started. And while I was working a corporate job in northern New Jersey. Basically,
New
a
Jersey.
deal fell in my lap from my hometown to buy a triplex that needed, it was vacant. It needed not gut renovation, but enough renovation, some work before renting it out.
Yeah.
And since I was 90 minutes away, I had kind of a friend of the family contractor, and I kind of trusted him, like, hey, just go at it, fix it up. I'll be ready to collect that check when I'm ready. But of course, it didn't happen that way. And the project was stalled, and, sitting, almost 100 miles away, I was getting nervous. And then I kind of got bailed out because somebody else wanted the property before, made an offer to buy the property before I could finish doing the renovation. So it was kind of a makeshift flip. Wasn't
so you
intended
didn't have
to
any renters in it at the time?
No, I didn't even finish the construction. I did minimal work, pretty much got my money out and went on about my life. So it's funny now, and that was probably about 10 plus years. No, actually, what am I saying? 20 years ago. I can't believe it's 2021. But now, since I've moved back to the area to join my dad's business, I drive by that place like once a week practically.
Oh, really?
And the people who bought it, they did a good job. It still looks pretty nice. And I'm thinking that could have been my first rental property. And I can't believe, basically just because I didn't have the right team and was a little bit naive about the work it took to just start collecting rental checks. And, I don't have that in my portfolio today.
Yeah. And so has that informed your decisions and how you work with clients today, how you help prepare and coach them to become new rental property investors?
It does, because, I learned from that mistake of not vetting the team, because the team is really important. And as well as, even if you're not lifting the hammer, I guess, especially speaking to women, you may think, oh, I know nothing about construction, or even some men, it's kind of like a fallacy that every man knows about construction. But if your whole life was a white collar job, you may not, and your dad didn't teach you that, you may not be as familiar either. But I think it was important for me, it's something as an ongoing learning process, that I learned more and more about what my contractors are doing, what needs to be done. So I'm a part of that decision-making process, even if I'm not necessarily on the ground. So I always make sure, it's one of the first questions I ask my new investor clients who get excited about looking at houses. I'm like, do you have a contractor? Okay, so you may not want to take on a big, $60,000 rehab if you don't have a good team. Like, that's a recipe for disaster. So I talk to them about those risks.
Where, contractors are really busy, right? And all the work that couldn't get done, during the height of the pandemic. And so, sometimes it's hard to book somebody.
Yeah, but you can't rush to book someone and not interview them about their experience, how they manage, figuring out how they work,
right?
How they insurance.
And,
I mean, that varies from state to state as far as the requirements of what you can have an uninsured person do versus a licensed contractor versus just a handyman. But it's important to understand those dimensions as you're hiring people to do work.
So going back to that original property that launched you as a real estate investor, and now as somebody who works full-time with real estate investors, tell us more about what you're working on now and how you work with folks.
So today, Daniel Woods Real Estate Company has continued to be a boutique firm specializing in working with investors. So we help people buy, sell, and manage investment properties in the Philadelphia area, and primarily residential, but we also help with small multifamilies, vacant land, small commercial storefronts, like a mixed use, you know what I mean, like a commercial space on the first floor and then rentals above. Kind of do that, every day part of my business. So, I'm working with people who just started and are making their first investment, and that's exciting because, you know, they're very excited about the prospect of getting to that second and third and fourth properties. And then I also work with people who are kind of at the tail end of their real estate investing career, thinking about how do I kind of preserve the wealth that they've built, but at the same time have maybe different support in managing the properties, and then maybe thinking about how to unwind.
So when you think about your professional life in real estate, like what are you most proud of?
Well, I'm definitely most proud of just kind of taking the torch from my dad, who started the business in 87. So it's amazing to be part of a business that has been around so long. And, you know, I was just telling someone, a prospect yesterday, that like my dad sold a house to somebody in like 94. And then I helped the guy sell the property in 2020. So it was like a full circle moment, you know, between father and daughter. So I love those moments. It's kind of cool to work and learn from him at this point in my life. But I do think, you know, most people into real estate are into generational wealth, and, you know, business is another type of generational wealth to pass on. So that's really what I'm most proud of.
That's a big accomplishment, and it's been really interesting to work together with you. Veronica and I are in a business coaching circle together, and have done some content together, and I've really learned a lot from you, you know, especially as somebody who just started in the last recession. So we have had some great successes. We have mostly single family homes and small multifamilies, and then we've had some things that have thumped us on the head. We had the tenant that put the baby wipes down the toilet and blew up the plumbing system, and it cost $45,000, as well as, you know, getting rental returns sometimes, you know, of what, like 1.4, 1.5% per month. So like having really good things and having things that haven't worked out so well. I'm curious, was your dad your financial mentor, or did you have another financial mentor?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask me that question. It's interesting. I think both my parents were the type of people who definitely focused on saving and, you know, having a personal budget and living within their means. So I kind of grew up with that mentality of, you spend money on things that are going to give you return on investment, be it education or investing back in our home and stuff like that. So I think I would be remiss to say that didn't have a profound effect on who I am. But I think as an entrepreneur, one of the, I guess, mentors from afar, this book by T. Harv, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He wrote this book called The Millionaire Mind.
I've heard the title, but I have not read the book. So now
so it's a classic. So if you're watching, Google it, The Millionaire Mind. The audio book is great too. I remember something they taught about, like, whatever your job is, part of your job is managing your finances. And you can't just outsource that. We're talking about investing in real estate. Everybody's side hustle is kind of, you know, reviewing their personal portfolio. And I never really heard about it that quite that way. If you, you know, appreciate money, then you need to kind of treat it that way and devote part of your, you know, hours or your tasks or chores, so to speak, to manage your money. So that, and get real with it, you know, because there's a lot of people who might like don't open envelopes of statements because they're scared to look at it. And I think that mindset really helped me.
Or they feel like there's a hurricane or a tsunami of acronyms, like what's a 401k, what's a 403b, you know, what's the difference between property taxes and school taxes, you know, it can be really overwhelming. So I think you're right that I would say that's probably the number one piece of guidance that I would give folks, regardless of how they're investing, is nobody cares more about your money than you do. Right. So you have to be the person that cares the most about it, no matter who's on your team.
Exactly.
So what's the best piece of advice that you have ever received?
Oh, related to real estate, I would say take action, because you can read a bunch of books and you can go to seminars, but if you're not in the game, you're not learning. There's so much I think that I've been able to learn as an investor for my own properties, as well as going through the tough lessons of my clients, that makes me so much more wise beyond my years, just because I'm going through these transactions with them and I'm seeing, sometimes I haven't been perfect for sure, but I think you don't learn unless you're kind of in the game. And I think a lot of times people are so afraid to get started, and like, you got to start somewhere, and then you learn so much for that next investment.
That's right. I agree with that, Veronica. I think even more than securities investing, right? Doing your mutual funds or stocks or bonds in your retirement accounts, for example, being a direct property investor really is a learn by doing experience. You can certainly look to turnkey properties, but even then, there's going to be some element of, just getting in there and getting it done.
No, that's a good point. So when I'm saying getting, I mean, like, put money on the table, yeah. But that doesn't mean that you have to swing the hammer to learn about, what right. needs to do with drywall, but you have to go through the process. And, right. I think that's also, you get a learning about how involved you want to be. Sometimes right. people...
Are you hands-on or hands-off?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think sometimes people aren't really sure, and they're not, it's kind of bantered around, oh, I'm a landlord. Like, I don't think sometimes people know what it takes from a time perspective, and also just from a mentality perspective,
right.
of what
right.
it takes
Business
to be a good landlord.
Patience, customer service, right? So, what's the best piece of advice then that you would give somebody who's just getting started as a real estate investor?
Well, one of the first things I ask people are, what are their financial goals? Because I think sometimes the newbies, they hear one or two techniques and it sounds either glamorous or quick money, and they think that that's right. what they should do.
Be retired when I'm 35, and I won't have to go to work or have a business. I'll just live off my doors, right?
Yeah, or I don't need any money. And not to say that there's aren't techniques where you can leverage other people's money, and leverage is like one of the best parts of real estate. But you have to kind of figure out, well, do you have the time and the resources to be able to make that work? Does that technique fit within your lifestyle? Especially like something like flipping properties, which if you can get a good flip, it's definitely a great strategy to implement. But it's kind of like a job, and I think sometimes people underestimate.
And a vacation property too is really you're creating a job for yourself, right, by doing either of those two things.
Yeah, well, I mean, the flip in terms of the amount of time it could take and the amount of moving parts, I think sometimes people really underestimate it. And there's a lot of people like me, I got bailed out kind of, like, I can't take it, and then you're taking a loss because I wasn't properly prepared to do that job.
So as you know, Veronica, on my blog, on the Real Life Planning blog, I've spent a lot of time, talking through the financial principles that I think that make for a good foundation to grow a successful rental property portfolio over time, or real estate portfolio in general over time. And one of those things is thinking about what your target leverage ratio is, understanding that the risk is concentrated in your first property, right? So you should be well prepared, if possible, when you go to buy your first property, and all those sorts of things. And we're going to talk, I think, over the course of the podcast together, and inviting other people to come and talk about their real estate experiences or their contribution to the real estate team. We're going to explore a lot of these ideas really and dive deep on them. Would you say is the big takeaway that you want folks to have from today, our kickoff podcast?
Well, one, I think we didn't get into the advantages of being a professional and getting started in real estate, and worried about that you don't have the time, but you are in such a good position in terms of from the financial resources perspective.
Mm-hmm.
One, you have a stable W-2 income.
Right, that you can leverage by saving to invest.
Well, the point I wanted to make is that the banks love you. Yeah. So one regret you didn't ask me was that I didn't get really going as quickly as I should have when I had that corporate job, because I would have been so much further along than, you know, a lot of people. I know some of your clients may be thinking about transitioning to maybe one or more partners, you know, doing something entrepreneurial, and you're viewed differently as a full-time entrepreneur versus someone who works for someone else. And so one, get started.
It's harder to get a load.
Yeah, get started and really be clear about your goals. And then lastly, there are a lot of ways to invest in real estate. I know we're going to focus on rental properties. We may slip in talking about other strategies that work well
different ways
as a part-time investor. But there's lots of different ways to get involved. And I think that's important to know as well.
Thank you so much for agreeing to come and talk to me today on the podcast. And I'm really looking forward to partnering with you and bringing other folks in to dive deep into how people who are listening can make real estate part of their overall financial goals.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And as well as sharing with different guests, you know, the listeners can learn more about our background over time and get to know us and our own personal investing experience. Because I think there's something different when you're talking about your own personal, real stories. Like, we're not making stuff up or talking like textbook. We're talking about things that really you know, we've seen happen. And, you know, we just want more people to be successful.
Excellent. Well, on that note, cheers. Have a great day.
All right.